All right, so let's get rolling. If you're unfamiliar with College Inside Track, we've been helping families navigate college search for the better part of 17 years. Our goal is always the same: to assure that families find right fit schools for their students. And we would define right fit as the right academic fit for the student, the right social fit for the student, because there are people on campuses too, and then the right financial fit for your family. And if you have a high schooler, I'm going to assume most of you do, or you wouldn't be joining us, you know this can be kind of stressful. And so one of our jobs is to just kind of reduce the overall stress of the college search process. All right, we are going to kick tonight off with a quiz, and we're going to do our quizzes through polls, but let me get it out there first. As a percentage, how much do you think tuition has increased at our public colleges and universities? These are our state colleges and universities. Do you think it's gone up 73%, 106%, 180%, or 213%? So let me get this out to you. You're just going to tell me what you think. You can only choose one: 73%, 106%, 180%, or 213%. All right, we have, it looks like about 123 folks on tonight. Great showing, nice job. I think it would have been very tempting on this beautiful night in what appears to be summertime still in Minnesota to go out and do something fun outside. So thank you for joining us tonight. All right, let's get this wrapped up here. I'm going to share my results with you. Looks like leading the charge tonight, 180%, followed very closely by 213%. All right, so let's take a look tonight. What we see is that our public institutions have increased their tuition by about 213%. By comparison, the private schools have increased on average by 415%. But before you get out your wet noodles and start lashing those private schools for that crazy increase, I want you to take a peek at our flagship public institutions. Our very own University of Minnesota sitting at 570% in that same time frame. Right next door, the University of Wisconsin at 1,047%. University of Michigan at 1,053%. Highest I've found so far, UConn at 1,300% in that same time frame. I sit down, I check college with families every single day. And I often ask the students about schools that they're kind of sort of interested in. And you might be interested to know that often students bubble up one of these top 4 schools or a name that falls in a similar context, like University of Chicago, Stanford. And so I want you to see the price tags associated with those schools. But the other thing that I just want to point out here is down at the bottom, we've got 3 flagship universities for their states, right? University of Kentucky at about 33,000, all the way up to UC Berkeley. If you're a resident of the state of California and the student wants to go to UC Berkeley, you're looking at about $40,000 a year. Our very own University of Minnesota sitting at about 32,000, depending on the school that you choose under the university's bigger umbrella. And so I think it's important today to just think about this differently, right? Our public institutions are not really inexpensive anymore. And so we're going to talk tonight about how you might think about making sure that schools fit your budget and how you can start to squeeze these prices down into something that feels more affordable. All right, I have another quiz for you. What percentage of students transfer at least one time? Is it 6%? Is it 14%, 25%, 38%, or 42%? All right, let me get this new poll out to you. Give me your thoughts. Tell me what you think. Do you think students on average transfer 6%, 14%, 25, 38, or 42%? Go ahead and let me know what your thoughts are. Sonia, out of curiosity, can you see people adding their answers to the poll?
Cozy, no, I do not see that.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, folks, I don't see my polls working, so apologies. We're just gonna move on then.
Real quick, mine did not, I didn't get it. Maybe, I don't know if that's true for others.
Oh, thank you for letting me know. Let's try it again. Let's try it a second time. Oh, let's see if I can relaunch it. There we go. Let's see. Yeah, relaunch. All right. Can you guys, there we go. People going like crazy. Thank you so much for letting me know that. I appreciate it. All right, so jump in. What do you think the national transfer rate is? I was just wondering if I popped it on the screen, so that would be an easy poll. All right, jump in. Anybody else want in? Because we are going to end this poll shortly. Let's take a quick peek. Neck and neck, just about 25 and 38%, followed closely by 42%. So let's go ahead and take a look. The national transfer rate today sits at 38%. Now, why am I bringing this up? Although it is clearly a crazy number and really sad to think about. This is why I bring it up. The average cost today, if your student transfers from one school to another, the average cost of their degree goes up by $14,000 just through making that transfer. And of the 38% of kids who made a poor choice the first time on their college, about half of those kids, 45% of them, end up changing schools yet again. And that increases the cost of the degree by $24,000. So today, right fit first time is a really important part of this process. And so we're going to spend a lot of time tonight talking about what fit means. All right, so let's talk about the kinds of financial aid. And I want to bring this to your attention because as families try and figure out, as they look at a school, how much it might cost their family, often what they do is they go out to the college website and they can see a number on the college website that says the average family on our campus pays X, or the average student gets about X amount of aid. And so I want to clue you in to what the school is actually talking about when they refer to financial aid, because I have found that the way that schools talk about it and the way that families talk about it are different, right? So when I sit down and I check college with families, one of the things they'll kick off the conversation with is something like, oh, well, we're not going to get any financial aid. And what they're really referring to is need-based aid. And it might be true, but I will also tell you, families are very poor predictors of whether or not they qualify, because everyone thinks about this at the federal level. Can I get federal Pell Grant money, for instance? And the reality today is that the vast majority of people are not going to qualify at the federal level, but may qualify at the colleges themselves. So yes, it's true when colleges talk about financial aid, they are referring to need-based aid, but they are also referring to scholarships. And scholarships don't have anything to do with your income and your assets. It has everything to do with your student. But here's a shocker. When colleges refer to financial aid, they are not just talking about grants. They are not just talking about scholarships. They are also including loans. So when you go out to the college website and it says the average student on our campus pays X, you should know that what that student, what they're including in that mix are all three of these things. And if your family will not qualify for need-based aid, that number already irrelevant. And if your family doesn't want to take out federal loans, already irrelevant, right? And so I want to break these down for you so you can start to figure out whether or not you fall into the categories and help you figure out what the colleges are thinking about and looking for. So let's kick this off by talking about need-based aid. There are two forms that you might fill out to determine if your family has need. Most people are familiar with the first. It's called the FAFSA. Some schools, though, use a second form called the CSS profile, and some schools actually use a secondary profile. They might use their own, right? These numbers, or excuse me, these forms kick out a number called the Student Aid Index. And the Student Aid Index today is about 47% of your adjusted gross income, which is an outrageous number, right? I don't think any of us think, I can't wait to send half of my income off of my student to school. But here's the deal. I want you to understand your qualifiers here, because again, what I find is that people are poor predictors of whether or not they will actually qualify for need-based aid. So my first tip tonight is get a hold of a FAFSA forecast tool. There are lots of them today. The one thing I want to point out is if you're going to go Google search this, Google search Student Aid Index Calculator to make sure that you're getting the most recent update of their calculator. We're going to talk about some of the FAFSA changes here in a second. But if you're looking at FAFSA forecast tools, there are still lots of them sitting out on the internet that are outdated. All right, so get a hold of that forecast tool. And here's some ways to think about how the FAFSA calculates need. Student assets are assessed at a 20% rate, meaning it takes the total assets a student has available, multiplies by 20%, and that's the amount assumed available for that student to pay for school. Parent assets, by comparison, only assessed at a little teeny tiny 5.64%. So when you think about where your money sits in terms of assets to pay for college, if you've got any UGMA or UTMA accounts, those are going to be assessed at the student rate, that much higher 20% rate. So counting against you at a 4 times higher rate. If you have your money instead sitting in a 529 plan or a Coverdell, it is only going to get assessed at that little teeny tiny 5.64%. Now think about this, because often I get families who say to me like, oh, we're being penalized for saving for school. You are not, right? You are not. In a 529 plan, the only purpose really of that 529 plan is to pay for college. So really 100% of that money is available to pay for college, but it's only getting assessed at this teeny tiny 5.64%. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. Now, if you don't know where your money sits, get a hold of your financial advisor and just ask them. It often doesn't make sense to move money around, right? Just know that if your savings is sitting in an UGMA or an UTMA account, I would encourage you to use that first and get it off the books, because you're going to fill out a FAFSA form every single year. There are 2 big mistakes that we see that people make on a regular basis, and I just want to give you a heads up when it comes to the FAFSA. The first is people assume that assets are the major influencer of the FAFSA. It is not. And the other thing is, do not put retirement accounts or the value of your primary residence as an asset on your FAFSA. So nothing that is a qualified retirement account goes on the FAFSA, and the value of your primary residence does not. So if you're lucky enough, though, to have one of those great vacation homes or cabins up north, you do have to put that on your FAFSA. Parent income, not assets. Parent income is the single largest factor on the FAFSA. As mentioned, it gets assessed at a 47% rate, right? So again, assuming almost half of your income available to go off with your students to college, most of us would consider that outrageous. Big time FAFSA changes coming to the 2024 FAFSA, so I just want to make you aware of what they are. The first is the verbiage expected family contribution is retired this year, and the outcome of the FAFSA will no longer be referred to as the EFC, or expected family contribution. It will now be referred to as the Student Aid Index. So if you have older students and you've filled out your FAFSA in previous years, the outcome will not be referred to any longer as the EFC. One of the big changes coming on this FAFSA, the one that will probably impact the bulk of families, certainly families who have multiple kids in college at the same time, is that the FAFSA will no longer acknowledge when families have multiple kids in college. So previous years' FAFSAs all took that into account. So when you filled out your first student's FAFSA and you put, I have 2 kids in college, it would take that 47% assessment of your income and divide it between your 2 students. So your income assessed at 23.5% for student A and 23.5% for student B. On the new FAFSA will no longer take that into account. So now your income on student A's FAFSA form is going to be assessed at 47%, and on student B, it will be assessed at 47%. What this means is for a lot of families who would have qualified often for need-based aid once they had 2 kids in college will now no longer qualify. The biggest impact here is on the middle class families, right? Lower income families were always going to qualify, although you might not qualify for as much. And high net worth families were never going to qualify. So the families this is taking the bite out of, honestly, would be the middle and upper middle income class families. The divorce formula also changing. So in previous years, you used where your student lived as the determiner for which of the 2 parents fills out the FAFSA, because only one parent is going to fill it out. On the 2024 FAFSA and moving forward, the way you'll determine this is by who financially supports that student more. This is self-reported. It isn't really something that we're expecting that you would probably need to prove, if you will, but you can't do silly things, right? So to the best of your ability, figure out which of the parents is supplying the bulk of financial support, and that will be the family who fills out the FAFSA. And in the event that you go 50-50 on what it costs to raise your kids, you'll have to choose the household with the higher household income. The definition around small business is changing, so it's disappearing, actually. There was an exemption for small businesses, so businesses that had fewer than 100 employees. That exemption is going away. It is also true for farmers, if we happen to have any of those, or maybe have relatives who are farmers. Now, all farmers and all small businesses will need to put their total assets of that business on the FAFSA form. So most certainly checking and savings accounts, if you have unsold inventory, if you're a farmer, your land value, right? All of that will need to go on the FAFSA now. And then there's a big positive here. One of the big positives is that third-party contributions, like a grandparent, will no longer negatively impact students' need-based aid. So if you have a third party who wants to help your student pay for school, a grandma, grandpa, an auntie, a godparent, the neighbor next door who loves your kids so much, any of those people can now do so. And if you are getting need-based aid, it will no longer have a negative impact on your students. All right, Sonia, we almost always get FAFSA questions. If you have a question over some of the material we covered, either kind of the state of the state at the beginning there or the FAFSA questions, drop them into the chat to Sonia. Sonia, what questions do we have?
Thank you, Cozy. And again, at the beginning, when you were going over the cost of college, was that for 4 years or just for 1 year of school?
Are you ready? Hold on to your hats, folks. That was for 1 year. It is the total cost of attendance, though. Those were not tuition numbers, right? That included tuition, room and board, and books and fees in most cases. Some colleges also factor in about $2,000 worth of personal expenses, which candidly is undervaluing it. Your kids are going to eat a lot more pizza than they are anticipating. So that number we usually pop up to $3,000 or $3,500.
Okay, and then could you talk a little bit on the transfer rate? Was that from a community college to a 4-year college, or like from university to university?
Could be. It could be both of those, right? Transferring, depending on the relationship between a community college and the college that the student is transferring to might increase the cost significantly. One of the biggest areas that we see the cost increase come from is the loss of financial aid as you make that transition. So maybe your student was getting financial aid at school one. What you're going to find is they are not going to get that money once they transfer to a new college. But the other thing that we see is that most kids are still in school. The average is about 8 months, so somewhere between 6 months and a year, of course, an additional time frame. So they're still paying for college and not earning income. So there's some pretty big factors that bump that number up significantly. But it could also be, in the state of Minnesota is a good example. Our community colleges are part of the state colleges system, right? So depending on the school that you transfer to, you might get a guaranteed number of credits transferred, and then that number wouldn't apply to you.
Okay, Cozy, and there's quite a few questions regarding if divorce is in your family structure. Is that calculate total household income if you're remarried or just the parent?
Yeah, good question. It is household income. So even if the step parent has no intention of helping your student pay for school, you still must include their income as part of the FAFSA form.
Okay, thank you, Cozy. And we have a lot of questions coming in, so we may need to table some till the end.
Yep, for sure. All right, I have one more quiz for you. You guys have done pretty well. Let's see how you do on this one. What school path do you think is the least expensive path? Do you think it's choosing a 4-year public college? Is it starting at a 2-year and then transferring to any kind of 4-year school? Is it starting at a public college and transferring to a private college? Or is it starting at and finishing at a 4-year university? That is private, a private 4-year university. All right, let's get this poll launched. Give me your thoughts. Least expensive path, the 4-year public, 2 years and then transferring, starting at a public, transferring to a private, or 4 years at a private school. This one takes a little more thinking, I know, so I'll give you an extra second or two. I can't see your answers, by the way. I can't see who's answering what, so feel free to jump in. Don't worry about us knowing who you are, because nobody else can see you either. All right, I'm going to end this and let's get it out. So it looks like most people choosing the 4-year public or 2 years and then transferring. So let's find out the answer to this question. It turns out it was a trick question. Any of those might be the least expensive path. It depends on your student and who they are. It depends on your family circumstances, and it depends on how the schools gift. The one thing I want to point out is that transferring almost always does increase the cost of your degree, so you want to be very, very careful about that. Today, it's important for you to ditch the old way of thinking. So all you people who put your hands up or put your vote in for the 4-year public, you have got to start to rethink the way that you assess college. Because guess what? I was that person too. I was 100% the person who said to my kids, stay in the state, go to a 4-year school, right? Go to our public institutions. I'm going to tell you how our search turned out at the end of the day. One of my, and I'm going to leave off my top 2. They were very non-traditional searches, but of our very traditional kids, one of them went to the University of Minnesota. One of them went to Drake University, a private school. And one of them went to an out-of-state state school. They went to University of Missouri, Kansas City. So out-of-state state school, private school, and a public institution. And guess which of those 3 was the least expensive? It was Drake University, the private school, followed by University of Missouri, Kansas City. And last on the list, the most expensive of the 3 schools my kids went to was the University of Minnesota. Today, do not think about schools as public, cheap, private, expensive. You will be automatically cutting yourself off from some of your best deals in that marketplace. Today, you need to think about colleges as flexibly priced and inflexibly priced, because guess what? There are public and private schools on both of those sides. So if a student from Minnesota wants to go to University of Michigan, you are going to pay every penny of $72,000 a year to head off to that school. And you think, I know that. I know that. That's why I wouldn't let my kid do that. Except if your student is interested in Eastern Michigan or Oakland, both of those are publics in Michigan, you will pay way less than the University of Minnesota because those schools don't charge out-of-state tuition to anybody. Super important to keep that in mind. On the private side of the house, if your student wants to go off to Duke, Stanford, Rice, UChicago, Northwestern, any of the Ivies, any school that's hyper-selective, you will for sure pay every penny of their price. If you're not need-based, those schools do not bring scholarships to the table. However, if your student is interested in Lehigh, if they're interested in Quinnipiac, right? Those schools are super interested in your student because they're not from the region, and you will find that they will probably bring their prices to something very close to in-state pricing in Minnesota. So today, a great college list is made up of both public and private schools. So let's talk scholarships, because this is what everybody wants to know. Where do we find scholarships? It's not going to be where you think it is. The number one place you find scholarship dollars are at the colleges. They are the single largest source. Our freshman class, well, they're freshmen now in college. Our senior class last year, the 2023 grads, garnered $27 million in scholarships from the colleges they applied to. The colleges give away a ton of money every year. And when a college gives away money, it does typically last all 4 years, right? So figuring out, here's my student, what schools would be interested in my student is the number one way of bringing down the price of college. Your college is also number 2 on the list. So we're going from largest rate of return for your investment of time down to the slowest or lowest rate of return for your investment of an investigative time. Colleges are also number 2 on your list. So far colleges are number 1 and number 2 because they are the biggest gifters. You will get an email when your student gets accepted that says, congrats, you're a bear, a beaver, a gopher, a duck, or some other woodland creature. And in that email, there is a link to additional scholarship dollars. Kids miss this money every single year. And why is that true? It is true because they are poor email readers. They don't know that the world communicates by email. And if the colleges sent this via text, they get it in a heartbeat, right? But they don't. They send it in an email. So watching your students' emails after you've sent out applications, you will catch these deadlines. Most kids miss them. Again, when the colleges gift money, it does typically last all 4 years. Number 3 on the list might be local scholarships, right? So this might be your Rotary Club, a bank, a local business person. However, there is a reason it is number 3 on the list, right? Our pyramid is getting smaller. These are much smaller award amounts. So your student scrapes and scrapes and scrapes and scrapes and finds $1,000. Congratulations. If you're going off to the University of Minnesota at $32,000 a year, it's now $31,000 a year, right? And classically, these just last for 1 year. And the studies are super clear. Kids do not go looking for more money. So if you're going to invest time and energy into research, invest it up here, looking deeper at the colleges. And the bottom of the barrel, where a lot of people spend their time, but it is a huge waste of your time, is out on the internet looking for private scholarships. Every parent wants to think that there's some magic chest of scholarships, and if we could just find them, then we could reduce the cost of college. But I'm here to tell you that is urban legend. There are not millions of dollars of unclaimed scholarship money. It is myth. So if schools hold the key, then what should you be looking for? What are the schools looking for? Well, the first thing you need to know is, does the school actually offer scholarship dollars? Merit aid is another word for scholarships. Merit scholarship money is not available everywhere. Think about it this way. If I'm a school that has an acceptance rate of 4%, 7%, 13%, 17%, where is the incentive to give away money? I have way more applicants than I have space for, right? There is no good reason. The other urban legend in college land is the kid who got into Harvard on a full ride. Everybody knows this kid, right? Your next door neighbor's cousin's daughter got a full ride at Harvard. No, they did not. This kid is urban legend, right? There are families that get money at Harvard, but guess what? It's not scholarship money for the kid being smart. It is need-based money, and Harvard very smartly calls it scholarship dollars. There is a good reason for that. It is a marketing driver. It drives more people to apply to that school thinking, well, my kid's smarter than that kid. That kid got scholarship dollars. Of course we're gonna. Except, guess what? Their scholarship money, need-based. And if you're not need-based, you will not see that cash. So once you know a school does give it away, in general, what we're looking at here are schools that have acceptance rates over 30%. And this is an important time to point out that rigor and acceptance rate are not the same thing. Rigor is about intensity of a program and outcomes of the program. Acceptance rate is about marketing. It is a marketing engine, right? So those two things are not the same. You can find rigorous programs at schools that have 60% acceptance rates. So once you know a school does bring money to the table, what are some of the things they're thinking about? We're going to break this down in a fair amount of detail here in a second. But in general, you want to look for schools where your students' GPA and test scores, yes, test scores, come in above the school's incoming average freshman class, right? So you want to look for schools where you're hovering slightly above the incoming group of freshmen. Extracurricular talents matter, but more is not better here, right? Deeper is better. Having 17 things on the list is not better than having 2 where you have deep dived, right? That is better. And then be demographically interesting. Most of us, including me, cut ourselves off from this, right? How do we do that? We tell our kids, stay in the state, go to a state school, right? That was me. You are cutting yourself off from being interesting to colleges all over the country, and that comes with a pretty good scholarship boost. All right, so here's the deal. I'm going to break this down for you. Behind the scenes, here is how schools are thinking, and I want you to pay attention to the different categories, although the values obviously go school to school, right? Demonstrated interest. Schools are interested in kids who are interested in them, right? So any interaction that your student has with the college, good. Do all schools care about this, right? Is anybody at Madison wringing their hands and looking at the kids who have toured Madison? No, right? But Lawrence is. So it's important to think about who might be interested in this, right? The higher the volume of applicants, the less the schools care about this in general. Look at this. If you live out of state, this school happens to be in upstate New York. I can't say anything more about it. But every school wants to say they've got one kid from all 50 states and 37 countries around the world, right? The demographic mix on their campuses matter to them. And it's so easy for you to do this. Just step over the state of Wisconsin. 74% of our kids stay in the state of Minnesota or touch a border. So just by leaving our region, you are way more interesting. For every A on the transcript, they literally add them up, multiply by a factor. Same with rigorous classes, same with a great letter of recommendation. So what they're looking for here are strong students, right? Kids who can come and be successful. This school, I just want to point out, went test optional about a decade ago. So even though the schools might be test optional, that does not mean they don't care about the test. Many of them still tying test scores to scholarship dollars. Just for filling out those financial aid forms, they are giving money, right? FAFSA and a CSS profile in this case. So if you're one of those families like, we're not getting any of that need-based money, I'm not filling out that dumb form, you are walking away from money, leaving it on the table. Highly recommend that you fill out your forms. And by the way, at this school, you didn't walk away from $4,300. You walked away from $4,300 times 4 years. I don't know about you guys, my time, totally worth 17 grand. And then a really well-written essay at this school can be worth up to quite a bit of money. We see schools routinely giving away 8, 9, 10,000 additional scholarship dollars for a well-written essay. This is not a check the box moment. We spend a ton of time with our students on their essays, telling their stories. All right, my second tip for you, and then we'll pause and take some more questions. Testing still matters, plan appropriately. The SAT or the ACT. The colleges view these equally. It does not make any difference any longer which of the two tests you take. That old school, like, oh, if you're going coastal, you do an SAT. If you're staying in the Midwest, you do it. Nope, nope, right? Get rid of it. The good news is that your student can figure out which of these two tests serve them best and then just focus on that one. There's no good reason today for a student to take both tests. A couple things that you should know that are coming up. The PSAT will be going digital this fall. So October is the month. So if your student is taking a PSAT, they will be doing it digitally. And if you decide the SAT is your test, you should just know that after the first of the year, the SAT will also be digital. And so it's important if you're going to do test prep to make sure you're doing it for a digital test. The ACT, by the way, stay in old school. Still going to be fill in the bubbles. Get prep that fits your student. There are lots of different ways to do test prep. Think about how your student learns and then focus on test prep in that regard. And then you can make decisions after you take the test and get your scores back about whether or not you want to actually submit those scores. Don't do it on the front side. And I know when you register, it prompts you, put in your schools, put in your schools, put in your schools. But if you put in the schools and then your student tanks that test, guess what? You can't take those back. They can't unsee those scores. So wait to send those scores until you are sure you are done. All right, go ahead and let's take some questions.
Thank you, Cozy. On the slide for that anatomy of the merit scholarship recipe, was that per year or is that every 4 years you get that scholarship? And are there requirements to keep those types of scholarships?
Yeah, this is a good question. So here's how this works. And I'm just going to pop back to this slide quickly. So what they would do is add up all the boxes that your student checks for them, right? And then it comes to you in the Presidential Scholarship, in the Amby Smith Scholarship, in the Bulldog Scholarship. And that money is classically yours for all 4 years, given a few criteria, usually. There's usually a minimum GPA that your student must maintain. And some schools make it super simple for you to do that, right? 2.8 GPA, get to keep your money. Other schools make it kind of hard. And so that should be one of your decision factors. There are a few schools this year we noticed that the student had to maintain a 3.8 GPA. That is a really hard GPA to maintain as a freshman in college, right? So it is important to think about that. The other main criteria is that your student still be a full-time student. You think, well, duh, that seems super simple, until your student takes 15 classes, not doing well in one, and then wants to drop that 4-credit class, and now you're going to be at 11 credits, right? And that puts you at risk of losing your money. So it's important to just keep those things in mind as you continue forward. And again, that GPA minimum requirement, I think, should be a decision factor as you're comparing your schools in spring of senior year.
Thank you. And if you missed the PSAT, are you out of luck for any merit-based scholarships?
Oh gosh, no. The PSAT, honestly, if your student didn't take the PSAT and they were not going to be part of the top 1% of the scores, right? If you have an inkling that that might be true, stop sweating that. The PSAT has one purpose and one purpose only. They determine national merit scholars. And I understand why that's confusing, right? You're thinking merit scholars, merit scholarship. Those are different things, right? They shouldn't even be called the same thing. The merit scholarship money, right, is based on these kinds of things. GPAs, transcript rigor, right? That's merit scholarship money that the school is bringing to the table. Now, there might be schools who have another line at the bottom here that says National Merit Scholar, $1,000, right? So the National Merit Scholar program is a very specific program. You get a final award amount. I think it's $2,500. Well, back in the day, it was the exact same amount, by the way, 20 years ago. Well, back in the day, $2,500 helped you pay for college. I mean, that was real money back in the day. Today, there are a lot of schools that don't even acknowledge that your student is a National Merit Scholar. It might help them get into a school, but there's no scholarship money available. And then some schools do really interesting things, like University of Oklahoma dismisses out-of-state tuition for National Merit Scholars. But your student only qualifies for National Merit Scholar, right? If they were going to be in the top 1% of the scores for the state of Minnesota, right? So scholarship, merit scholarship money is different. Those are different things.
Okay, and just to expand again on that anatomy piece, is how do schools know your grades and how many AP classes you're taking? And when does your student start applying to college?
So they'll know what your student's transcript looks like because you're going to send it, right? They do that through your high school. So you'll request that your transcript be sent. Your student will connect. So you should be in touch with your guidance counselors, and they will let you know how to go about that at your high school. It's a little bit different at every single high school. Application season is typically started in fall sometime of senior year. You can start as early as August 1st when the portals open for the applications. I would not recommend that it go past the end of December though. So you want to try and get all the applications out the door basically during fall of senior year.
Okay, and lots of questions regarding how schools are flexibly priced and inflexibly priced. Is there a master list for that? And how do you know if public schools offer merit aid?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you some broad generalizations, and then you literally do have to pick up the phone and call a college, right? So some schools will be really clear with you about how they're going to do this. So I'm going to use an example. Iowa State is like this, right? GPA across the top, ACT or SAT score across the side, follow it together. Like, here's your GPA, here's your test score, here's the amount of scholarship money they're giving you, right? They are very straightforward. University of Minnesota, Madison gives you no inkling about what they're going to do. And so there's no great way short of picking up the phone and saying, what is the average merit scholarship award on this campus? In general, public institutions are basing it off of two things: test scores and GPAs, right? They're not deep diving into your student's background. They might make decisions about acceptance that way, but they don't classically give away scholarship money for those reasons. Private schools, though, do this kind of stuff, right? Which is how, at the end of the day, they end up coming in often at roughly state school pricing. it makes it much more challenging. The long and short of this is, no, there's no giant guidebook. No, there's no one website. To understand if a school gives away money, understand their acceptance rate. That will be your biggest indicator, right? Schools over 30% acceptance, and the further away from 30% you get, the better the money becomes. This is a general guideline. Public schools, not so good at gifters. Private schools, better gifters, right? That's the way this works in general. If you want more details, by the way, I'm going to offer to do a free consultation, and we can talk more deeply about your own student and where they sit and your likelihood. So feel free to take advantage of that.
Okay, and last question in this segment, Cozy, is could you just talk about what the CSS profile means and how does that lead to more merit aid?
The CSS profile is a financial aid form, not unlike the FAFSA, except that it gets into a lot more detail. In general, you will actually find yourself less needy than if you just fill out your FAFSA, because the CSS profile for a lot of schools wants, they want your retirement information, right? They want to know the value of your home. So they're asking about all those things that FAFSA leaves off. The way that you can get merit scholarship money, which is different, remember, than need-based money, these are different buckets of money. So you might find yourself less needy, but if you fill out the form, the information on that form is so valuable to the college that some schools actually bring scholarship money to the table just because you fill out the form, regardless of what happens with the form. I'm going to move us ahead. Thank you, Sonia, so much, because I want to make sure that we wrap up on time, and I'm happy to stay an extra couple minutes and answer questions. I want to chat about some of the trends that are impacting college today. In general, we see about a 30% increase in applications since 2020. That is a crazy number. Year over year, schools, colleges might see anywhere from 1 to 2% increases in applications, not 30. This is a crazy number. And so it's creating all of this crazy behavior on the parts of colleges. And so I want to help you understand some of the things that are happening behind the scenes that are impacting not just the cost, but your students' ability to get in. The first thing I want to talk about is test optional. That test optional landscape started because it was hard for kids during COVID to take a test because the sites all closed, right? You couldn't go get a test if you wanted one. And so a bunch of schools, but not all of them, about half of the schools in the country went test optional. Well, a lot of those schools have kept test optional in place because guess what they discovered? They discovered it's a great marketing engine. When they are test optional, they get a lot more applications. More applications means that our acceptance rate drops, and it makes us look more selective. And they love that, right? Because what happens when you get more selective? You don't have to give away money. You get a lot more applications. Just kind of the halo around your college brightens up a little bit, right? And so the schools love this. They love that test optional brings more applications their way. Here's the thing I want you to know about test optional. It does not mean the schools don't care about the test. It just means, hey, it's optional. If you don't want to send it, you don't have to. But the rest of that sentence is, but don't think we don't care, right? So what we see in behavior is behind the scenes, schools accepting students who have test scores to share at higher rates than kids who don't. But don't lose hope. If your student is a great test taker, there are a lot of different ways to think about this. There are schools who truly are test optional, but there are also ways to boost your students' application. This huge volume, this 30% increase in applications, means that schools get to change the way that they think about who they're accepting and what pool they're accepting from. Early decision is an agreement between a student and a school that says, I love you so much, school, that I am going to withdraw my other applications if you let me in. In doing so, the schools know they have you, right? they're worried about losing you. And so if you apply early decision to a school, you will almost certainly pay more for that college education. The other thing we see then are a lot of schools. So in the tier 1 space, the tier 1s are all the super selectives, right? Johns Hopkins, all the Ivies, U Chicago, Rice, Duke, Stanford, Northwestern. Those schools pretty much behaving the same. They've seen about a 36% increase. In the tier 2s, however, the tier 2s would be schools like Boston College, BU, Tulane, Tufts. Those schools have seen about a 26% increase in application numbers. And so what we see are a lot of them leaning into early decision to fill their freshman classes because those are guaranteed students. And they also know that they don't have to give money to those students. And so it's important to understand that not only does it mean that it is harder to get in, but your student has got to do a lot more. If you have that super Sharpie kid and your super Sharpie kid wants to go to U Chicago, it is not enough to just be smart. You have got to do something monstrous, right? A big project that attracts attention. The other thing we're seeing is often for a lot of schools, secondary factors like rigor level of the transcript, the student's essay, that demonstrated interest piece are holding higher opportunities for acceptance for the students who are doing those things and doing them well. And then the last thing that I want to point out here is during COVID, there was a lot of doom and gloom in the college space, right? Oh, colleges are going to have to start reducing prices. Parents are so angry. We haven't seen that at all. In fact, in the last year, we've seen most schools increase their costs by anywhere from 8 to 16%. So it is not getting less expensive. Does that mean there are deals to be had? Sure, there are deals to be had. But don't think that you can send your kid off to college anymore for 20 grand a year, because it just does not exist anymore in the space. My third tip, make college selection more of a business decision, right? The colleges are not looking at the applicants and going, oh my gosh, that Jane, I love that Jane so much. We can't wait to have her on our campus, right? Nope, it's a business decision for them. When they accept a student, it's a business choice. If they give away money, it's a business choice. So I want you guys to be a little bit more analytical as well. Assure that the school teaches the way that your student learns. Every student has a little bit different learning style, and so you want to lean into schools that lean into that learning style. Make sure that they've got multiple majors to elbow through, because most of them are gonna. 80% of kids change their major. So give them room to do it without having to transfer schools. And then I've said this a couple times, big brand, selective schools need your student to be more than smart. Passion projects, internships, research, something massive has got to be sitting on their application. And it's not, I started a Greek club at school. And then my last tip for you, and then we'll take some questions as we wrap up here. Create a family philosophy to pay for school. Create a 4-year plan for where is money coming from for each and every year of college. Define the expectations for all the people who are going to pay. So if grandma and grandpa have a 529 plan and you have a high school student, it is time, sit them down at the table and say, I've got to know how much money is sitting there because I'm trying to create our budget for college. And talk about this now. I don't care where you are in your process. You need to have the conversation now, right? Bring the student in. Here's what we plan to pay, if anything. Here's what we expect you to pay, if anything. Start to have those conversations so that you go tour the right kind of school. One of the biggest problems we see is that people go tour the Porsche, but what they want to pay for is the Chevy Malibu. All right, a little bit about us. College is an industry. They think like businesses, right? Just like real estate, just like investing. You guys are going to do this a couple times probably in your lifetime. Our senior class last year was 200 kids, right? We know what happens behind the scenes. We're going to help you navigate that. You can do it on your own, but candidly, a lot of people leave money on the table. We do help families navigate the entirety of the college search, application, and acceptance process. That national transfer rate when we work with families goes from 38% to less than 4%. Right fit, that's the goal. We can ensure that you get the best pricing for the schools on your list, and you will know the cost before your student applies. And then we get to be a neutral third party. Of my 5 kids, 4 are girls. They have all mastered the eyeball rule, and I never get to be the smartest person in the room. So good news, we get to be that kind of middle ground for you. So here's a cool thing I want to offer to do. I'm quite sure Sonia has tossed out the into the chat the Google form. So I do free consultations. We're going to sit down and chat college for an hour. You, me, and your student, right? I'm going to answer all your questions. I'm going to discuss your goals, suggest some strategies you can use. I can give you a rough estimate of your students' FAFSA outcomes so you'll know. Should you be looking at schools that can do both need and merit for you? Or are you going to be one of those families that only gets to sip out of the merit bucket? So a little bit of housekeeping, then we'll take those last questions. If you have a sophomore or junior tonight, please take advantage of the consultation. It's free. Most people leave it very relieved. We have a good conversation. Fill out your Google form, and Sonia will reach out and get you on my calendar. Maybe your student's too young. Maybe you have a 9th grader and you're like, no way, Cozy, they are not ready to chat college. Go ahead and fill out your form anyway. We'll reach out second half of sophomore year and we'll get you on the calendar then. Do follow our Facebook page. It's just College Inside Track on Facebook. Tons of tips out there. Great information for families. And then you joined us tonight, I'm sure, because you have a high schooler. That means you know people who have high schoolers. Please share. If you want to share the Google form, feel free. If you just want to share my contact information, you're welcome to do that. I'm telling you right now, people are very stressed, and you know who is the most stressed? Your students. So share our information. Students are very relieved coming out of that family consultation. Share this good information with people you know.